Okay, it looks like we got the live stream set up. So I'm also going to make sure that we're recording as well.
Okay.
And that's all of our bases covered. So let's go ahead and do some introductions really quick. I'm just so excited for this reading, Erin, and that you're here and we get to hear your work. So thank you so much for coming on to Poets in Pajamas. For a quick bio, let me pull yours up, Erin. I had it in front of me. So Erin Hoover is the author of Barnburner. That was from Elixir Press in 2018, and No Spare People, which is forthcoming in 2023 from Black Lawrence Press. Barnburner won Elixir Press's Antivenom Award and a Florida Book Award. Hoover is an assistant professor of English at Tennessee Tech and a curator or host of the monthly in-person reading series Sawmill Poetry. So we'll have to definitely drop a link to that in the chat to make sure y'all check that out. Erin also produces Not Abandon, But Abide, a monthly interview series of women and genderqueer poets of the South for the Southern Review of Books. Originally from rural Pennsylvania, Erin has lived in the South for a decade now. In addition to teaching, she's worked as an editor, journalist, fundraiser, and public relations director. So very warm welcome to Erin, who will be reading for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have another 15 minutes after that for questions. And that will be our reading for the evening. So I'm going to drop that in the chat, and Erin, I'll let you take it away, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. It would be pretty cool if I could be all of those things at once. Maybe I am, because when you work in literary community stuff, you're always in some ways fundraising and doing publicity and intersecting with journalists. So I think maybe I am doing all those things. So Barnburner, my first book, came out in 2018, and the book was very much, I would say, a book of frustration. I mean, 2018 was kind of a strange time to come out with a book. Most of the poems were written in 2015 and 2016, which was a time of significant turmoil in our country that I think now we've become used to. But at that time, it was like living, I don't know how you all thought about it, but it was like bizarro time. And it was also when I was having my daughter. And so my second book, rather than being, coming out of a sense of, frustration and even self-destruction, No Spare People is more about what comes next. So if you're going to reject kind of societal ideas around gender, family, about the place of women or what a family should look like, what then do you do? And so No Spare People is very much about my daughter and I. I'm a single parent by choice, so I'm unpartnered very deliberately. And we live in the South, and I live in a very conservative area. So in some ways, I do some writing about that. I also write a fair amount about, I guess I call it economic instability. For a long time, I was an adjunct professor. I've been a grad student. I mean, they say that your 30s and your early 40s should be these times when you're earning money. And I think I was, earning like $15,000 a year and then raising a kid. It was something. It was a very hard time. And the book chronicles that in some ways. So even though there are hardships, there's also a lot of self-actualization going on in the book. And so, No Spare People, the title comes from a rejection I wanted to pose against this idea, especially during COVID, that there were some people who were expendable. Some kinds of families that didn't count, some races and classes of people who were not going to be prioritized. And so the title of the book comes from that. And I'll read you the poem that No Spare People comes from. I have, I think, 3 short poems and then 1 long poem to share with you. So there are things that I've just said that maybe won't be in these particular selections, but I tried to pick something that that represented the theme of the book, which is around self-actualization and resistance to kind of gender norms and expectations. So the first poem I'm going to read is In Middle Age, At Last I Understand. Dear literary dude bros, dear lads of rock and roll, I want to be rebellious in a way nobody ever sang about. I desire a removal of every language I do not mean to speak from my person, every other person, out of my body, out of my blood and lungs and bile, the limbs I thought worthless, though in middle age I find them worth a fortune. They really are, although I reject the language of value too. You cannot commerce me. I enacted for too long what other people wanted from me, the fat purse of being wanted. My lines lit me up. I took direction, a girl taught to acquire men, but never that the hilly lands I captured had already been salted, bare as the bald head of a queen. It took me 20 years, but I stopped glistening. I put the velvet away, the doe voice, the shiny symmetry under which I was dying. Correction, I'm getting closer to dying all the time. I'm getting closer to mapping myself as more than a territory to capture, stuffed head for the hunter to hang. I don't know. Is it better to cover up or to shock an audience? I may be cold marble now, or I might be on fire in the glow of every dumb fable I told myself, combusting over and over like fireworks, my naked breath blue like a torch. So that poem is in some ways a rejection of all of these feminine expectations. And I'll tell you, I mean, just personally, I was always very good at performing them. It consumed a great part of my life, being a good girl, being a smart girl, being assertive but never aggressive, never really putting my needs first, always being a caretaker. I was good at that. But in recent years, I've just said, nope, fuck it, I'm not doing that anymore. And part of that, I think, is reaching middle age. And part of that is that motherhood, I think, really changed me, not in the way you think, where, I realized there was a greater purpose beyond myself. And I thought about the future and I was optimistic about future generations, not like that. It was more that sort of the veil had been taken off of a lot of the way I thought the world worked. I realized, how little we actually prioritize children. And by having one. And also just the kind of struggle that went around with just how much everything cost. I was kind of really scraping. My daughter's 5 now, but and she's never going to remember those years, but they were pretty rough. So the next poem I'm going to read is a short poem. It's a modern sonnet, so it doesn't rhyme, but it does have a volta, and it is 14 lines, and the lines are roughly, pentameter lines. It's called Baby Care Instructions. Before you lived, I lived inside my own loathing. Some parents have children to replace themselves, but we're 2 instead of none. Pushing you on a swing, sunset, my hands on your mammalian back. I remember how everyone thought I'd kill you by mistake, my throat in hives because I believed them. You made me too, daughter, drawing the last sip from a juice box, wisps of hair rising in the dirty breeze. I show you how to care to propel yourself, and all threat dips like the sun behind the jungle gym. I may have been born a knife, but my daughter won't be a knife, nor its willing sheath. So I guess in that poem, I felt like for a long time, I was in like a defensive position as a woman. In Barnburner came out like the month of the hearings for Justice Kavanaugh. And so a lot of the poems that came out of that came out of talking about, sexual assault and just kind of the crap women had to put up with for so long and still have to put up with. So when I had a daughter, I neither wanted her to have to be defensive or, to be a knife or to be someone else who would, have to sacrifice herself to avoid others being injured. Okay, this poem next is called What If Pain No Longer Ordered the Narrative? It's a prose poem. Dinner, she pushes the triangles of French toast back and forth on her plate, forming amber currents of syrup, lifts a piece dripping to her mouth. I watch my daughter's jaw work as the restaurant clatters around us, an ordinary vortex of sound. And once again, I fix not on the object I love, but on her taken, all standard issue tragedy, workaday shit, mostly crushed chassis and burnout buyers. I lose her, I go first, and there are only two of us, no spare people. Such toxicity electrifies all of our meals, inaccessible, variable, thick, a theoretical her and a theoretical me, the only constant that I birthed her with a 38-year-old body, so those years divide us. In our pair, one would be left to singular loneliness on a future unspecified day. This is absolutely true. But today she sips her milk from styrofoam, her skull painted with white blonde hairs, blue beat of her pulse at the temple, a 3-year-old with adult-sized ears. She'll replace me with another beloved one day, as children do, and if I don't let her, I'll fail, a different failure than those nights. She'll bring me books to read when I'm too tired, or years of my tone poisoned by the inevitable fiascos at work, my entitlement pooling in our home like carbon monoxide. I've operated as a vassal in service to a terrible king for so long. Tonight, I wrap her uneaten bacon to take with us and guide her arms to their jacket sleeves. I buckle her in. I don't curse the train crossing. I allow another car to lurch into the lane ahead of us, and he flicks me the bird. In the rear view, I watch my daughter's eyes, and I don't even curse the titans of industry who set America on fire. On our street, I pull into the long coast of our driveway, the home I pray she'll think of fondly once I'm gone, except I will never be gone. I carry her body inside, limp with sleep and curved against my shoulder, and I put her to bed. So that's the last poem in No Spare People. And I mean, it's something I've thought about. What if I no longer let pain or destruction or heartache or injustice fully order who I am as a person or my family? And so that poem speaks to that. So next, I'll read the long poem, and I'll see. I don't think it'll take us more than the allotted time. Hopefully not. It's written in sections, and it's called Forms and Materials. So this poem came out of the idea of what would be the platonic form of the kind of family I wanted to have, and the way I wanted to express the kind of person, generally speaking, woman that I am, in an absence of many models to do that. The materials piece of it comes from, there's an Adrienne Rich quote speaking to the way you have to write from your real life. And she advises writers to begin with the materials. So it's about trying to discover an idealized form by really looking at like, what is my life? What can I shape my life into? Forms and materials. Form is not my body. It's bodily problems by fortune, a brief phone call, or uncomplicated doctor's visit. For years, I dutifully followed its directions, slotted limbs into the games you may have tried to, the blood rest, carny rides, and ball toss, bored fellow teen at the helm. I didn't complain back then. I needed affection like I deserved to sit first chair violin to win the Masonic scholarship. In hooking up, I earned a Fulbright. For some, sex is shameful, but like later things I tried, drugging or extreme dieting, this wouldn't be a big deal to me. Another example of socially condoned ways to grow up. I don't know enough about my ilk to call that normal, but I sat in a lot of leatherette Hondas making alpha, beta, and gamma plans to escape being touched by boys. More than once, an older woman asked if I knew what I was. A dyke, she called herself, promising a slow start that we hold hands to get into the bar since I was only 17. I didn't care. I wanted to sit with someone, talk semiotics or Japanese film, prime numbers, Anthony Bourdain. And if a promise of sex got me close to that, then okay. My body was an entrance fee for women too, though I got spooked back to the boys who smelled like pot roast and deodorant and would one day want kids. I wanted a child, and like my math equations, I knew what to do. You may have guessed I allowed but one way to do things. Back then, I thought the only people who understood friend as I did were long gone religious sects, Mennonites in cloisters, or the Shakers channeling lust into labor, turning out sweaters, rocking chairs. What word for me is an ill-fitting, unclaimable? A painter I know, a man who gave birth around the same time I did, said we didn't have the language as teens for what we are. And to me, that made sense. Why he transitioned in his 40s after a lifetime of femme, and why I can be honest now about what the sex I had got me, a whack-a-mole, a broken lease, a yeast infection. For decades, I argued with would-be and former lovers, but I always gave them, mostly him, what they wanted. I gave a kiss, a layover in St. Louis, a Sarah Lawrence girl who spills her gimlet at last call, pogoing to the Stooges, I want to be your dog, in an ex's memory. But who will I give my honest answer to this? What are you, anyway? Sir Talleyrand, I read in the op-eds that the future isn't female anymore, but I'll still dedicate this volume to you. I'm not a pronoun in orientation, though I am that too. I am the word continue. I am, I was, we were. I can't explain it to anyone who once touched me, except each time we were two people who bristled and bubbled in exact specificity. Probably. We had lives that formed us, these materials, but marriage is terminally abstract, and so am I. I didn't want women or men, only an intellectual life. But instead, I got chased from the dinner party by some Puritan goody claiming I had designs on her insipid mister. Wrong idea, but a clue to woman as domesticated pet or wormy colonial acre. Until recently, no credit without a husband's eye. Exiled, I sat on the porch stoop or at Waffle House, spitting out a twisted little laugh at being thought a slut. Word like a glass bowl refusing to break, ontologically incorrect, irresponsible word. About the famous character, the woman in A Awakened, the male novelist wrote, the world's law was no law for her mind. Pain is always the vehicle. Pain is feminine. And for a while, I let anathema fill and vacate me, an unsteady dot on the landscape, invisible except to itself, flashing. Anecdote. Years ago, I visited, provisionally, a women's commune nestled in southern hills I couldn't find now. The first non-binary person I knew, a new friend, thought they lived there. We ran our palms over the tufted brows of goats and roved Buttercup Hills all afternoon, then dined with the women, their hair shorn or gathered in scarves, someone inevitably picking at a guitar. A familiar situation, mostly transplants from Portland, New York. The matriarch said she and her partner, a gay man, built the place with their own hands. They'd studied woodworking in books and were self-taught farmers. All gathered at her long pine table were some form of separatist. No straight men, no one who consorts with men of firm condition. I pondered all of my gentle male exceptions as we wound linguine to our mouths, plum tomatoes and basil sprung from the farm's prolific garden, the group performing human noises of satiety. Aware I was a guest, I thanked the matriarch who said, you don't get it yet, but you will. And I said, oh, I do get it. But that was so long ago now, and I'm just starting to. Perhaps in the shadow of Dobbs versus Jackson, I could use some distance from men. Some say my hand is simply unasked for, as in, dear sweet, please fit neatly into our shared hetero void and behave wife-like, or we will fucking kill you with celluloid and forced birth and a fetus made into a god. Thy desires shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. The very being and legal existence of the woman is suspended during the marriage, or at least is incorporated into that of her husband, under whose wing and protection she performs everything. This hand is mine. I scorn thy wing. I thrive in denial of thy desire. Nary hath struck me down. Said another mother I know who'd had IVF. How ironic to pay a cryobank. I've had sperm in my bed, on my t-shirt, in my hair, everywhere. Sperm, sperm, sperm. There's too much sperm in America. America is run by sperm. But the vial I brought sprung me from the romance industrial complex that kept me docile for many years. And as an exit fee, it worked. The poem is about half over. I'm going to stop it because I don't want to overstay my time. But it'll be in No Spare People, and part of it will be published in Northwest Review. Maybe I can get it, the whole thing published elsewhere. I'm not sure, but it'll be in my book. So thanks for listening. And I don't know if you have questions. Anyone has questions they've been saving or that have been provoked by by this reading?
I'll start with one. I had a lot of questions, and then they kind of slowly started combining as you kept reading, and I think I now have the question I want to ask most. At first, I was struck by how there was still such a good emphasis and almost seems like a reverence to rhyme and kind of more traditional form, with this strong leaning on what I see as like almost like new confessionalism, like a lot of that authenticity of anecdotes of life and experience that inform the traditional interplay of metaphors and similes and such. But then with that final poem, and the way that the prose works, I think I'm wondering if you have a background at all in slam or performance poetry, because as I was hearing that, it was like an audiovisual narrative where I could just like see, like when you said America is run by sperm, there's too much sperm, sperm, sperm. It's like, oh boy, like I'm there now. I wondered if you had how you wound up with that poem in particular, if it came out of experiences mounting, or if you set out to write it in this kind of big epic address almost.
I did want to write a poem about how I came to understand gender and sexuality, which is definitely something that has occurred in like almost like phases or movements throughout my life. There are some key experiences that are somewhat fictionalized, but also like based on lived experience in the poem. So it involved I had been thinking about this a lot anyway, because this is kind of my concern right now is thinking about what kind of family do I have, and how do I define that for ourselves? Not I live in a very conservative area that would not define my choices as moral. Choosing to have a child on my own, and so that poem draws in the part I didn't read a bit more so, but you heard a little bit of it with some of the things that have been said about women and marriage and women as property, really. Women's inability to have their own credit. In some ways, I'm a product, as are other people, in my generation who are parents now, in the United States. And okay, there are certain like class things going on that I do want to acknowledge, but to some extent, we have certain choices that we would not have had in the past, to be a wage earner, capable of supporting a small family, being able to have a child through IVF and a donor, right? That's something very new. I am in some ways, born not so long after Roe versus Wade was decided. I'm now a parent during a time when it's been overturned. And so there are things I'm very conscious of going on right at this moment that I wanted to capture. And then to historically look at how my thoughts had evolved over time. I do have an interest in performance poetry and slam poetry. I have a little bit of a background in that, although I wouldn't say that I've done it extensively, but I definitely enjoy it. I'm also a poet who thinks a lot about meter and what meter can do, and that is really interested in for me, poetry is all about the push and pull between the syntax of the sentence and lineation. That's where, when you get the sense of forward momentum in the poem, that's something that I'm doing on purpose with meter and the line. So, and I it's one of those things where I practiced writing that way, and now I can almost like hear it. And when it comes to certain word choices, I intuitively, I think, know which word to go for, or I revise in that direction. Because I do think of poems as an experience. Hopefully, when they're successful, I know that's how I experience poems I read. That's why I love poetry. It does that. I think, we're all different, but for me, poetry allows me to like sometimes think along with someone else, to enter into someone else's cognition as much as that's possible. And that's what I try to mimic in my work. That is a very long answer. And my dissertation is over. Oh yeah, I hope that answered it.
That was a great question, and a really great answer. And that's what I appreciate about hearing you read, is that sort of neo-confessional is, I think, maybe what you said, Aslan, but like that kind of like very immediate, very autobiographical, and all of that, but with such like a formal structure that is like doing so much to like, you hear that it's so effective. So that's just a compliment. It's not a question. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of, in terms of confessional, I feel like in some ways people have kind of thought maybe that's over, or, that's no longer popular or something we want to pursue as poets. But I think wanting to base your poetry or any discussion of theory, right? So I love theory. I love gender theory. I love thinking about like media theory, postmodernism, things like that. Anything has to be based for me in these details that enact or replicate what people go through in their lives. And a lot of what I write is a countervailing narrative, right? Like I want to push back against, instructions like, you will be a woman, you will be like this, you will do this. This is where you fit. I've never been someone who accurately fit anywhere. So I'm, at least not exactly, not like a cookie cutter, right? So to push back against that and to affirm the actual details of one's life and the way it feels to go through your days and to live in the place where you live is important to me. And I love seeing other poets do that too. I mean, that's what I want. I want to know how other people live, what they're thinking, how to assert anything about this time we live in, which is basically insane. So.
Thank you. I did drop a link to Barnburner in the chat, and I definitely am looking forward to ordering a copy of No Spare People. Is it available for pre-order right now, or do we have to wait a little longer?
You will have to wait. Yeah, it comes out in October of 2023, so the pre-order I think should begin in April. So that'll be here before we know it. But my website, erinhooverpoet.com, has some of the poems linked to the extent that they're available online. I just had a poem come out in the Bennington Review. The poem I read, What If Pain No Longer Ordered the Narrative, will be in the Sun, and that'll be online soon. There's some good poems that you can read. Well, of course, I think they're good. I wrote them in Gargoyle magazine that you can read. So if you go to my website, you'll see some of my poems linked there.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you again so much for reading. That was just great to listen to. The links are in the chat here. I also just want to note that our Poets in Pajamas is meeting again on December 18th for Liz Chang. So we will be back at 7 Eastern for that live reading. And this has just been such a pleasure to hear your work. And thank you again. And thank you, Mary, for tuning in, and Aslan as well. And we'll see you guys next time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.